This is Nick Black, and today I'm in the Hollywood Hills where I'm talking to actor Barry Primus. Barry, first of all, thanks for taking time to talk with us.
No, I'm glad to do it.
Okay, tell me, how did you become interested in acting?
You know, I really can't think of a time when I wasn't interested in acting, because my grandmother was interested in acting and actually did some theater work in New York, and my sisters both were interested in acting. And being from New York, I was surrounded by theater because my parents loved the theater, and I went to the theater when I was young. And I guess actors were heroes in my home. They were cultural heroes. And I loved doing acting in school, and it was one of the few things I was really good at, singing and dancing and acting, so it gave me a natural bend to do that. I always just say I wanted to be an actor because I liked the hours. I didn't want to get up in the morning at 8 for a regular day job.
So were you the only one in the family to take the plunge?
Yeah. I think both my sisters tried it for a time, but they quickly gave it up. I stuck with it. I started acting professionally when I was 16. I did some commercials, and then I won a scholarship to the Dramatic Workshop, which was a well-known school where actually Marlon Brando had gone years before, and Bob De Niro went about the same time. And so I started professionally about 16 years old.
How did you come to the scholarship, and what was the scholarship about?
I read about it in the paper that they were auditioning young people for this Dramatic Workshop, and I went down and read some Shakespeare. And I remember I did something from Julius Caesar, which I just learned in high school, and I got into the school. And so I went to high school during the day. At nighttime, I went to this school. Then I went into the off-Broadway movement, which was sort of beginning at that time, but which was terrific, with a wonderful director by the name of Jose Quintero, who really was one of the founders of the off-Broadway movement. Did a series of plays at Circle in the Square, which is a well-known theater at that time. There was a tremendous fervor about the theater in the 50s and the 60s. We had wonderful writers working at the theater. Williams was at his peak, and Inge and Miller. Kazan was working at the theater, or I was later on to meet up with. And there were wonderful directors, and movies were still far and away for us guys.
So you were learning the craft, meeting people?
I've met just fantastic actors. As a matter of fact, I workshop at Circle in the Square. We were doing Uncle Vanya, and one of the unemployed actors was Jason Robards Jr., who was wonderful. I met Geraldine Page at that time, which just a few years before I'd worked with James Dean. I remember I had a whole talk with her about that. They were just amazing people, exciting people.
Did you help each other out? Because you would have been all at the start of your career, wouldn't it?
Yeah. I always find actors terrific to be with, very human. I think we helped each other. I mean, later on I was to get into the Actors Studio, where a lot of the people who are working today, I got into the Actors Studio a little later, and in my group was Bob De Niro and Dustin Hoffman and Al Pacino. And in fact, I got into the Actors Studio. I think your audience knows what that is, but they may not. The Actors Studio was a well-known, is a well-known organization, which is a seminar. They have these seminars on Friday that are run by your peers, and you do scenes, and it's not a school. It's sort of a master program school. It's like after you know how to act, you would go there and perfect your craft. And it was started by Elia Kazan. I got in at night with 3 or 4 people, and we had to audition twice. It was very hard to get in, with Dustin Hoffman and Al Pacino. One of the ways you got work, and I always tell actors when they want to work, what should they do? I always say go to an acting school, go to an acting class, because other actors have information and will tell you, hey, I'm auditioning for a play, you know, Nick, why don't you come with me? And, you know, there's a part and blah, blah, blah. And that's how you get work.
So obviously the Actors Studio was a great experience. And then how did you, and you've been doing the plays and all that, so how did you make the step into films? And after that, did you concentrate on films, or did you go back to the theater?
No. The first film I was ever in was directed by Marty Ritt, you know, a wonderful director. It was a thing called The Brotherhood, which was like an early Godfather. That was an interesting experience. And I remember, because the cinematographer was Boris Kaufman, who some consider like the greatest black and white cinematographer he did on the Waterfront. And it was the wonderful movie that Sidney Lumet made with Rod Steiger. Porn Broker, yeah. And people consider him like the greatest black and white cinematographer. I got my first real big part through Faye Dunaway, because I had been up for a movie with Arthur Penn, and Arthur Penn, that was right after Bonnie and Clyde did a movie, but I don't know. It's a movie called Puzzle of a Downfall Child. I don't know, have you ever heard of it?
I've heard of it, I haven't seen it.
You know, I don't know where that movie is, but it's a very interesting film about high fashion modeling, and I think it's one of Faye's favorite movies, and she's terrific, and I don't know why or where that film is, or why it hasn't been brought back. It had Roy Scheider in his first role. Jerry Schatzberg, very good. I don't know where that film is. I'd like to get a copy of that. And so I got my first role because Faye and I had been in Lincoln Center together under Kazan, this theater company, and I had told Arthur Penn about her before she got Bonnie and Clyde. Now, I don't know whether that specifically led to her getting the role, but I do think that Arthur first met her, first saw her on stage because of me. I was walking down the street one day and she said, "Oh, Barry, I got this and this and this. I'm doing this movie with Jerry Schatzberg and you have to do the part." And she brought me to Jerry and got me my first role in film.
Not a bad director to work with because he had a great reputation with actors and plus he'd already had a lengthy career.
Yes, you're right, but that was his first film. So at that time he had a big reputation as a still photographer. That's what his reputation was. And later on, then he made film with Al Pacino next. Panic in the Needle Park, yeah. He was good with actors. I don't know where Jerry is, if he's living in New York or Europe. I haven't seen him in a long time.
Tell us about The Brotherhood. What was that experience like? And being your first film, how did you modify your technique for the screen instead of the stage?
You know, it was kind of a heady experience because it was made first in Biograph Studios. I don't know if Biograph Studios was did you know about Biograph Studios was in New York? It doesn't exist anymore, I don't think. And it was where a lot of very early movies were made. And
D.W. Griffith?
I think he might have, but you know what that studio is really famous for? Because I just got back from Russia, and Bob De Niro told me this. Trotsky worked at that studio as an extra. There's an interesting story.
Was an actor before politics?
No, I think he was just a starving revolutionary living in the Bronx. That's amazing. And it had Kirk Douglas in it, Irene Pappas, Luther Adler, Susan Strasberg, some wonderful people in it. And Marty Ritt was directing it. So it was a big, heady experience. I played a hitman. So it was kind of like pre-Brotherhood time. And I remember the most extraordinary experience about it is that we shot part of it out behind the Statue of Liberty. We kept going back there about 3 times because we didn't get the shot. It was a special shot with a helicopter, so I kept getting re-employed and brought back. So in those days we made very little money on the stage, and it was a real gift being re-employed for this film over and over again. I enjoyed it. In terms of altering my technique, I'd done some television up to that point. There was some television in New York, like The Defenders was a famous show that I was on. I had to trust to the director, you know, to say don't do so much in the frame. Basically, good theater actors are good film actors, you know. It's just a question of possibly realizing when you have to do a little less than you would have to on the stage, that you don't have to project as far. And that relaxation is so important on film, even more important than the stage.
Well, The Brotherhood was, like you said, pre-Godfather, but it didn't hit the heights of The Godfather, box office-wise anyway.
No, I don't think so. I think that movie's fairly respected, but I don't know whether it wasn't as much of a family film, I think, as The Godfather, which made it a very, because Francis is very special the way he did that.
I want to talk about a film that I saw called Been Down So Long That It Looks Like Up to Me. Tell me what the experience was like there, Barry.
You know, I have to say this to you. I mean, I can't believe that you actually saw that. I just got a copy of that movie. I haven't seen it in 20 years, and we're watching it now upstairs with my assistant, Peter Kalis, who's from Melbourne. And if his father's listening, call Peter. He needs some money.
You're not paying him enough, Barry, is that it?
Right. Peter is from a Greek background in Melbourne, and Peter Kalis, he's an actor, and he's here. We've been working together with him for quite some time now. He keeps telling me how great Melbourne is and how special it is. I haven't seen that movie Been Down Looks Like Up to Me in 20 years, and I just got a copy of it the other day, so it's amazing that you're saying that. I don't know anybody that's playing it. I'm surprised that they're showing it on Australian television.
It has been on for a long time.
What did you think of it? Remember it?
I don't remember much of it, but sort of familiar with it because of the Doors song, and they want to investigate Richard Farina, but I remember it was quite good, and difficult subject matter too.
That was a very interesting thing. Been Down So Long was a book by Richard Farina, which was extremely popular in the early 60s. It was so popular that they say that 1 million people bought paperbacks, and that for every person that bought it, 10 people read it.
Well, it influenced Jim Morrison to write the song.
Did he? Yes. What was the song then?
Been Down So Long?
I don't think Jim Morrison wrote that. Did he write that?
Yes.
I thought it was an old blues. It's not?
It's a Morrison original.
It is? But I thought that Farina took that out of a blues song. He didn't?
Maybe he did, but...
Well, it was a very influential book. And the movie, unfortunately, which was directed by Jeffrey Young, and well done, came at the tail end of all these youth movies. You know, after The Graduate, there came a whole slew of movies, and for a while everybody was interested in them. And then there was a movie called Strawberry Statement, I remember. And that came to sort of the end of that period, which was an Easy Rider period. And we came at the end, and somehow, partly I think that the movie was not released in areas where youth would go to see it. They miscalculated and then did this kind of mainstream movie. But it's warm to my heart because it was an interesting film to make, one that I thought would possibly do better than it did. And I was in that period as a person, and this is about a kid who doesn't know what to do with his feelings about not quite belonging to society. So many of those films were about that. And I identified very strongly with that at that time during the war in Vietnam and this and that. I think it's a very interesting movie, and I wish that they would resurrect it just for the sake nostalgic almost of that period. It's very resonant about that whole period. And it's very resonant about young people and not knowing what their choices are. So I enjoyed that.
What happened to Jeffrey Young's career? Because he didn't seem to make another film.
I know, and that happens.
These days, you make a movie like that, it might be commercially successful, but you'd get noticed as a director and then you'd career.
Because today, maybe you're right, but that partly has to do with the fact that there's cable, there's internet. It wasn't. Either it was on the big screen or it wasn't. I don't know if it got sold to television. That's why I was curious to know. But Jeffrey went on to head studios, become a writer, and he wrote a book on Kazan, the Kazan on Kazan. Very good book. As a matter of fact, I'm going to call Jeffrey. I see him from time to time, but now that I've just seen the movie in 20s, I want to call him and tell him.
And ask him questions.
And ask him what was his story, because he should have had a better chance. But I made Mistress, directed Mistress, when I've now had about 6 different projects not get off the ground. So it's not unheard of to be discouraged. It's not easy to get certain kinds of movie off the ground.
Let's go on to Boxcar Bertha in New York, New York, working with one of the greatest directors, Martin Scorsese, and also New York, New York with Bob De Niro. And tell us a bit about working with Scorsese and De Niro.
I met Marty through Roger Corman, and Roger Corman was doing Boxcar Bertha, and Roger asked me to meet with this young director who had seen some shorts and a movie called Guess Who's Knocking, and he was very impressed with him. He said, why don't you go down and tell me what you think of him? So I met him at a restaurant here, and Marty spent the whole time discussing my character that I would play by drawing pictures for me in Boxcar Bertha. I don't think he had the job yet, but he was also showing me what he would do with it. Then I went upstairs and I said to Roger Corman, I said, this guy's terrific. He's going to be a terrific director. Boxcar was a terrific experience. Marty has unusual energy. He had a real passion for making films, and it was quite obvious that he was going to have a very unusual career, and he lived and breathed film. And he knew so much about it, and this was his first Hollywood film. I think he had 20 days to shoot it in or something like that. He drew every frame, and none of the cameramen would follow him. So he fired 3 cameramen in 3 weeks. He used to, arrive with his pictures and say, this is what I want you to do, and they would just look at him.
Why wouldn't they do it?
Well, I guess they were old veterans, and they may have felt that this young whippersnapper was too, and there may have been a power struggle, and Marty may have driven them a certain way. I don't know. I did 3 movies with Marty, actually. When you work with a director like that, you feel always safe, because no matter what, you know that it's going to be okay, and that somehow he's going to use you in some special way, that something is going to emerge, and that will be special because he's basing it basically on what you can do. There's always a tremendous excitement around his films, much like Kazan. Elia Kazan, I worked on the stage with him on 3 plays, and there was always this incredible sense of high intention and a kind of conspiratorial feeling that it was us and then there was the rest of the world. And Marty had that same sort of, or a certain kind of importance and specialness to something. It wasn't just anything, it was going to be something very, very special. Marty did want to be a priest at one time, I think, priest or a filmmaker, and he does bring a certain almost religious fervor to it, and it really engulfs you.
From the sublime to the ridiculous, on my last trip I interviewed Corey Allen, a film called Avalanche. I want to talk a little bit about Avalanche, which fell apart at the seams. Did any of that, you being an actor, did you get any of that trouble or that turmoil?
No, I enjoyed it. That was a job that Roger Corman gave me. I wrote him a letter and said, I need a job right now. And he said, well, why don't you do it? He actually gave me my choice between Piranha. Remember Piranha? I think Sales wrote that, yeah. And I did Avalanche.
Bit of a mistake, maybe.
Not a bit of a mistake. I think I did it because I wanted to go to Colorado. I don't know why I did it. I just somehow felt that it would be, I don't know. Anyway, because Rock Hudson was in it, thought it would be Mia Farrow, I thought it would be an interesting movie. It's kind of quiche, I guess. Is that the word? Yeah. But I like Corey. He was very nice. How's he doing?
He's retired, and he's got Parkinson's, so he's had to retire.
I'm very sorry. Everybody remembers, of course, that he did the Jimmy Dean movie. He's a terrific guy, though.
We're running out of time, Barry. I'll just mention a few of the films that you've done. You like Down and Out in Beverly Hills and Absence of Malice and Big Business, and the remake of Desperate Hours by Michael Cimino, and also you've worked with Irwin Winkler on a couple of films that he directed as well, Night in the City and Guilty by Suspicion. But I want to quickly ask you about Mistress, which you directed yourself and you co-wrote yourself. What was that like? Did your acting career sort of set you up to be a good director?
Well, sure. I mean, so many good directors have been actors. Orson Welles, Elia Kazan, you can go on and on. So much of what I know about life is from being an actor, because that's what I've been all my life. Mistress was an extraordinary experience.
You assembled a fabulous cast.
Oh, yeah. Well, there were people I knew, and people always ask, how do you get people like Marty Landau and Robert De Niro, Eli Wallach, Danny Aiello, Christopher Walken. How do you get them to be in a movie, a small movie? We said, well, just write a part that they haven't done before. And in this case, it was like an ensemble, and they all wanted to work together. And I think Bob De Niro paid the movie a compliment. He said the reason why the movie is attractive is because the movie has a kind of a beating heart. It's really passionate, and passion is evident in the making of the film. That film, which is so much about the need to be creative, the terrible price one pays because you're blocked in not being able to express yourself, I think is a true thing. And I'm incredibly pleased and delighted when people come over to me or touched by something about it. But it's usually people that have the need to express themselves the way that character did and are looking for themselves. And so when I thoroughly identify with that. And as I say, which is interesting, is I don't think that that movie has been released in Australia. I had an argument, went on and on, or a discussion if you want. In my mind, it's an argument with, I think it was Columbia who released it, about, they kept saying, well, it's the kind of, not going to work in Australia. I kept saying, what do you mean? It's like an Australian movie. It's like the best of those movies that I love in Australia. And I do respond to those Australian movies. I think there was a whole period where they're very human and terrific. And so I couldn't get them to release it. And I don't think, I'd be curious, we could find out whether it was ever released there. I'd love to. I have some prints still here. I'm ready to show it.
So any distributors listening, give Barry a call. He'd love to see it on the big screen, because unfortunately I only saw it on cable over here. Barry, we're just about out of time. I quickly want to ask you what you're up to at the moment.
I just finished a movie with Mark Rydell directing, who you've interviewed when you were in America. I've worked with a lot. I used to shoot his second unit. I did the second unit in a rows and cast his movies and act in his movies. And I did the James Dean story with him. I played Nick Ray, the director, which was interesting. And now I'm putting a film together, which is kind of a companion piece to Mistress. And I realized that I wanted to do this for a very long time, and I've been waiting, and now I think I'm going to do it. Terrific cast for it, and hopefully have it done. Maybe when I get it done, I can get down to Australia and show it down. They love that.
Oh, yeah, excellent. And come on down and promote it. Barry, thanks very much for taking time to talk with us.